Moccasin Trail, Chapter 8. Jim slapped a big chunk of elk meat onto the spread-out hide and hacked off a slice with his knife. He cut this into strips about an inch thick, scored them crisscross, and carried them over to the high willow sapling rack he had built near the big oak tree. Squaw's work, he thought grumpily, as he added the elk strips to the venison already spread out on the rack. Meat making was not his favorite occupation. He'd done plenty of it during the years with Tom, when there was no squaw handy to do it for them. But he'd never quite got over the feeling that he was demeaning himself. That means doing work that was below what he should have been doing. A man hunted the meat and made his kills. Later, he had all the jerky he wanted, but the chore that took place between times was none of his affair. Still, he reflected as he poked damp fir branches into the slow, smoky fire burning under the rack. It wasn't as bad as the sort of thing Johnny had been busy with ever since they found the claim a week ago. Swamping brush, cleaning stray saplings out of the clearing, digging up the stumps afterward. What did they want so much open space for? The cabin wasn't going to take all that room. Jim saw no sense in bothering with the cabin anyway. Counting the new hides, they'd soon have enough to make a good snug teepee, and that forest was full of lodge poles. But Johnny and Sally wouldn't think much of that idea. He grinned fleetingly at the notion of Sally keeping house in the Crow Lodge. No, it had to be a cabin. There was already a growing stack of logs yonder by the fir trees, and he could hear the clear whack, whack of Johnny's axe back in the woods, trimming another. From the direction of the river came the sound of vigorous splashing and slapping and singing as Sally scrubbed the last grime of the trail out of jeans and petticoats. Jim turned from the fire as Dan'l emerged from the woods, Moki almost invisible beneath a load of firewood, stalking sulkily at his side. Jim laughed aloud at the expression on the dog's face. That morning, to Dan'l's fascinated delight, he had rigged a travois, 2 poles harnessed to the dog's shoulders and lashed together at the far ends to trail at the ground, forming a crude sled, and it was on this that the wood was piled. Moki hadn't suffered this indignity since he'd carried red deer's wood in Absaroka, and there was a lugubrious self-pity in every line of his body. Jim leaned against the meat rack, shaking with mirth. "Wah, ain't you mistreated?" Moki whined piteously, making a terrified show of effort as he staggered forward, straining at his load. Jim only laughed harder, but Dan'l looked worried. "Honest, Jim, I'm scared I piled too much on him. I know you said he could pull a lot, but gee, look at the way he's walking. You reckon I've hurt him?" "He'll live," drawled Jim. He reached out and took a piece of elk off the meat rack, dropping it to the ground. The effect on Moki was instantaneous. He trotted forward as springily as if the pile of branches was so many feathers, sank to the grass between his shafts, and began gnawing the tidbit. "Well, look at that," exclaimed Dan'l in disgust. "Here I've been feeling sorry for him." "He ain't nothing but an old faker," Jim chuckled, leaning over to loosen the dog's harness and drag the travois aside. "Him and that cussed mule, they don't take to work no more'n I do." He turned ruefully to the spot sheltered by the spreading branches of the big oak tree, where he had a couple of hides pegged out on the ground. "More squaw's work." Multnomah Indians around here do a decent job of tanning them. "Want a chore?" he asked Dan'l. "If it's your kind of chore." Jim grinned at him, pointed to the graining tool lying on the ground nearby, a curved bone in which an iron blade had been seated. "See how that fits your fist." He walked to the oak tree and squatted by the nearest hide, looking it over critically. Then he pegged out the new elk skin beside it, hair side down, and set Dan'l to work, happily scraping off all the flesh and sinew. As Jim went back to his meat-making, he was again conscious of the sounds of bourgeois activity from all directions. Remember, a bourgeois is like a white person who wants to live in a civilized way. There was a muffled crash from the woods that meant another tree was down. From the water's edge rose the sound of splashing paddles and voices shouting greetings. The Rutledges, to the twins, and Sally's mutual delight, had settled directly across the river, and a day seldom passed without the scrape of a canoe prow, or the bump of a log raft against one bank or the other, as the two families shuttled back and forth on neighborly errands. Jim's knife was slashed irritably into the elk carcass. All this banging and whacking and chattering and coming and going, a man couldn't hear himself think. But Sally and Johnny thrived on this life. Both of them worked every day from sunrise to dark, and never seemed to mind. They were bursting with plans. Any free minute Johnny had, he spent striding across the glades and along the creek, planning the cattle shed here, the first wheat field there. In the evenings he sprawled beside the supper fire, ciphering in the dirt with his stick, to find out how many bushels to the acre he'd have to get to pay their debt at the Hudson Bay Post in Willamette Falls. Ciphering means doing some math. Sally was the same, chattering vigorously to anyone who would listen, of a future cozy with rose bushes, kitchen curtains, and quilted counterpanes. She dealt just as vigorously, meanwhile, with the drudgeries of the present, scrubbing and mending, making candles and soap out of the byproducts of Jim's hunting, airing blankets and patching shirts. Jim marveled at her. Nothing daunted her. She'd put up with any hardship or tackle any chore, so long as it had to do with making a home. And she still found energy for determined little attacks on the more uncivilized of Jim's ways, his erratic notions of when it was time to eat, his habit of cleaning his knife on his shirt front, his persistence in wearing at his belt that little horn of castoreum, which she declared made him smell like a whole passel of wild animals. She reminded Jim of a hummingbird, tiny, beautiful, and fierce. She was just finishing with the elk when she appeared on the steep path from the river, lugging the big basket of wrung-out clothes. Even Jim, unaccustomed as he was to taking thought for any squaw, could see that it was too heavy for her. Somewhat sheepishly, he walked down and hoisted it to his shoulder, carrying it up to the oak, whose spreading branches she used for a clothesline. "Well, thanks," she said in surprise. Then she flapped out a shirt and tossed it over the branch. "Dan'l, honey, did you catch any fish this morning?" "Too busy totin' wood," the boy answered, pointing to the travois. "Then we'll eat the rest of the deer haunch. Run, fetch it out of the wagon while I finish hanging these things. Then call Johnny in. It's most noon. My stars, don't the days fly?" Half an hour later, as the four of them sat together finishing the last of the cold haunch, Jim frowned and looked around to the east. In a moment he got up and walked to the edge of the clearing to stare downriver. "What's wrong?" Johnny asked him. "Somebody comin'." "Why, I don't hear nothin'." "Use your eyes, Johnny. That mule stopped chewin' 5 minutes ago." Every head turned to Bad Medicine, who had been grazing up near the fir trees. He was standing motionless, his ears upright, and every muscle quivering. "Well, shucks," said Johnny. "Who sets around watching a mule chew, anyhow?" He walked over to stand beside Jim, adding, "You ain't serious." "Sure I'm serious." Jim saw the mule's ears go down. "White man," he told Johnny, and as he noticed birds spurting out of the thicket downstream, and heard a distant chattering of squirrels, probably a wagon too, no more'n half a mile away, Dan'l dashed up to them. "Say, look at how Moccasin's actin'. I think he heard something too." "Did he describe it?" inquired Jonathan dryly. "According to the mule, it's a white man with a wagon." Even Jim had to grin, but he went back to his eating, unperturbed by Sally's giggled, "I'll believe all that when I see it." 10 minutes later, a tall gray horse cantered into the clearing, bearing a big, tow-headed, square-shouldered boy with a sack of cornmeal under his arms and an air of holiday-making. Fetch out that banjo, Johnny, he yelled. You're about to have a passel of company. Johnny let out a whoop and ran towards him. Sally and Dan are right behind. Sam Mullins, by all that's holy. Ain't seen you since the Dallas. How's your mother? Where's your claim at? Company, Sam? My stars, what company? Everybody you know. There's a wagon load right behind me. Dan'l, how's the boy? Miss Sally, I got a little present for you. Just some old meal. But it'll fill these folks up. Don't you worry. They're bringing their own grub. Everybody talked at once as they pulled Sam off his tall gray and towed him across the grass. Johnny's face was flushed with delight. His long arms swept this way and that as he showed off his property. Sam admired and commented and complained about Oregon rain and his own poverty. Lugubriously, pulling his pockets inside out while Johnny flung back his dark head and roared with laughter. Man, you ain't the only one. Sis here, she's got patchin' down to a fine art. Sam, you ought to meet my brother, Jim. Hey, Jim! Shake hands with the best doggone coyote shooter and cattle doctor ever come out of Kentucky. Dan'l, run fast and yell for the Rutledges to hustle over here. Sis, you and me better hunt something up for all them folks to set on. Jim shook hands, hearing the squeal of wagon wheels even as he did so. He liked Sam's looks and self-conscious grin, but found himself tongue-tied. Sam was too. Suddenly he shifted his feet and darted glances at Jim's necklace, and a few moments later loped off hastily as his trail-widowed mother arrived with the Millses. Behind the Millses came the Howards and the Burkes, the young Selways, all the others of the wagon train who had settled within a 20-mile radius of the Keiths. To Jim, it seemed the whole world was suddenly converging on the clearing, but Johnny and Sally were in their element, pumping hands and shouting delighted greetings, dragging out crates and boxes and blankets in lieu of chairs. The glades became cluttered with wagons and saddle horses. Shouts rang from the river as canoes were beached, and children tumbled out of them to run whooping and chasing through the fir grove and over the glades. Men slapped each other on the back and reminisced about the plains and the snake crossing, talked crops and plans and bushels to the acre. Women swapped bread recipes and croup remedies and rose slips until Jim was ready to cut loose and run. Johnny kept pulling him forward to shake hands with somebody, then turning to welcome somebody else, leaving Jim surrounded by stares. Jim stood it for about half an hour, then disappeared. Rutledge discovered him a little later, lurking on the farthest outskirts of the crowd, prowling nervously between woods and river, and keeping a sharp eye on Moki, who was as jumpy as he was. Why, son, I was wondering where you'd got to, said the man kindly. No need to be shy of these folks, you know. Make too thunderin' much racket, mumbled Jim. Rutledge laughed. They're a mite noisy, I give you that. But it's the first time we've all been together since the Dallas, and they've a lot to catch up on. A lot to celebrate, too, by golly. Besides, there ain't no danger around here. These valley Injuns are friendly. Folks are safe when they's this many of 'em together. Safe, wah! I feel safer when they ain't a bourgeois within 20 miles. Look there, what's Johnny fixin' to do now? Why, he's going to give us a tune or two. Rutledge spoke reminiscently. Dunno how we'd get across them prairies without that youngster and his banjo. We had some mighty fine times around the fire at night, with the wagons drawn around close. He ambled away a moment later, but Jim didn't notice. He was too busy watching Johnny, perched on the tailpiece of a wagon, with one knee cocked up and the banjo slanted across his tough, lean body. He was laughing, and the curly black lock that always fell over his forehead jiggled in time with the melody he was plucking from the strings. Jim caught only a few notes from the fresh wave of merriment that rose as Ned Rutledge drew Sally to her feet, called out something to the crowd that was gathered in a laughing, clapping circle around him. In an instant, 3 more couples were in the center of the circle, and a dance had started, the gayest, most rollicking dance Jim had ever seen. The heavy-booted men suddenly found a lusty grace, stamping and pivoting and swinging their partners in response to the orders Johnny was chanting as he strummed out the music. The watchers clapped and roared encouragement. The dancers circled and spun, crossed and recrossed, and wove in and out, the women's skirts swirling like open flowers, the patterns of movement flashing swift and intricate, but always coming out just right. Jim had forgotten all about watching for danger. His rifle trailed useless from his hand, and his ears were full of the banjo. Johnny's medicine was powerful indeed, for it could make folks forget the miles ahead and the miles behind, forget trouble and a strange land, and loneliness at least for a while. With a final whirl, the dance broke up into a flurry of laughter and panting people. New squares formed, and Jim, absorbed in the rhythms of a different tune, did not see Sally detach herself from a chattering group and start in his direction. She was within a few yards of him before he noticed her. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes were bright. "James, come dance with us." "Me?" He took an involuntary step backwards. No. "It's fun. I'll teach you. I will, James." She hesitated, then moved toward him tentatively and stretched out one hand. Her first gesture across that invisible line. "You're just standing here all alone." He longed to grasp the slim hand held out to him, let it draw him into that charmed circle where the others lived. Could he? Then a fresh burst of merriment from the dancers brought all his shyness back. He turned and fled through the trees, plunging deeper and deeper into the tangle of oak and wild plum and hazel, until both music and laughter had faded, and there came to his ears only the small, secret noises he knew and trusted. The whir of a twig, the whir of a wing, a crow's call, the wind. Let them go on and dance. He wasn't going to go back there and be stared at. Let them all crowd around Johnny. He stayed away, prowling aimlessly among the trees or hurling pebbles into the dark, clear river, until the night dropped down and he knew the last wagon would be gone. And the next morning, spotting the Rutledge twins paddling across, bursting to talk it all over with Sally, he abruptly went off hunting. Jim spent much of his time hunting those first few weeks, but even as he rode through virgin forests, along the banks of wild little streams, he could hear the ring of axes, the distant shouts of men to their oxen, from the other claims round about. In spite of himself, he grew more and more curious about the bourgeois and their ideas, their hard-bitten, good-humored faces, and their ceaseless labors. Why did they want to fight this good country so? Why did they insist on growing wheat and raising potatoes when they could fill their stew pots every day in the year from woods and streams? Why must they mark off a tiny space of ground and chain themselves to it when they could have 1,000 square miles to wander in? He could not quite put down the queer fascination he felt for these people's clothes and belongings. He would lurk in the trees surrounding a new-built cabin, watching a man sharpening a plow or uncrating a massive sideboard, or a sun-bonneted woman unpacking cups and plates and pewter spoons. Then he would ride slowly onto his deer, tracking. One day it was a smell that stirred him. He had made his kill, a good young buck, and was riding home on his leisure, eating a chunk of warm, raw liver off the point of his knife. Ugh! And Moki trotting alongside, and the laden mule clopping behind. He had just splashed across the stream that bordered the mill's claim when an enticing, oddly familiar odor drifted to his nostrils. What was that? Something from long ago. He left the animals in a thicket and crept forward. Through the trees he could see the mill's half-finished cabin and the cook fire that smoldered near a battered wagon. He watched a woman take a steaming skillet from the ashes. Then, unbearably attracted by that half-remembered fragrance, he left the trees and moved across the clearing, still chewing the last of the liver. He had no thought of sneaking up on her, but his moccasins made no sound, and when she turned, she found a feathered Indian at her elbow, his face, hands, and carelessly held knife smeared with blood. She dropped the skillet and let out a screech that frightened Jim fully as much as he had frightened her. "What the Sam Hill!" gasped Mr. Mills, stumbling around the corner of the cabin. He stiffened at the sight of Jim, then suddenly relaxed. "Oh, Lordy, it's Johnny Keith's brother. What did you want, son?" "It's all right, Martha. Will you hush? Nobody's gonna scalp you." Jim spoke warily. "What's that in the skillet thar?" "In the skillet? Why, it's hoe cake. Good jumpin' Jiminy, boy. Look at that blood on you. What you been doin'?" "Just eatin'." Mills's wife edged rapidly towards the cabin, motioning back her children, who had appeared from all directions. "For the land's sakes, Ben, give him some hoe cake. If that's what he wants, give him anything." Jim rode homeward, wondering angrily if they thought he'd been eating bourgeois babies. Johnny Keith's brother. He'd never walked into the post at Willamette Falls without hearing that phrase, without feeling curious or doubtful or suspicious eyes follow him down the room. "Don't worry about it, Jim," Johnny always advised when he complained about it. "They don't trust you because they don't know you yet, and they've heard lots of tales about you keep wolves for pets and held up the traitor at the Dallas with a knife at his throat," and Johnny's white grin would flash. "I do my best to squash all that fool talk, but the truth is, I don't know you very well myself." Would they ever get to know each other? Jim wondered. He often caught Johnny studying him as they sat around the supper fire at night, staring at his necklace or his braids or his scars, as if trying to penetrate the barrier of those 9 years by sheer willpower. And Jim did his share of watching and puzzling too, wishing he knew how to make medicine like Johnny made it, with a warm smile, a banjo, a pair of candid, steady black eyes. Johnny didn't know how to trap or steal horses or even read sign, but there was never a man who didn't like and trust him on sight. When Jim reached home with the tale of his bloody hands and Mrs. Mill's reactions, Jonathan laughed till he shook, but then he grew thoughtful. "That'll go the rounds," he said. Why didn't you steer clear of other folks for a while, Jim? I can sure use you here." He jerked a thumb toward the meat rack now, dark with much smoking, and the fresh-killed buck, and the numerous pegged hides. "Ain't you about through with that job by now?" "Them hides? No, they gotta be sunned some more and then twisted." "I meant huntin'." Jim looked at him in surprise. "Why, thunder, Johnny, you don't ever get through with huntin'. No more'd you get through with eatin'." "Well, sure, but we got enough meat to last a good while, and we can always get squirrels and fish to fill in. Seems to me the important thing right now is to get our cabin up, with you and me both loggin'. You mean you want me to start chopping trees too?" "Yeah. Anything wrong with that?" "No," admitted Jim glumly. "But looky here. S'posen we chop all them trees and sweat a couple weeks more to get this cabin built. And then we want to move on. We can't fold up no cabin and take it with us." "Move on? Good Lord Almighty, who wants to do any more moving? I had a bellyful of that last summer." He came around the fire and dropped down on the grass beside Jim. "Why, this is home. It's what we come all the way to get. Now we got it, we can take root like one of them old fir trees. Don't you get that feeling, Jim? Look yonder at the glades. We'll have 'em knee-deep in grain by summertime, and a kitchen garden by the woods there, and smoke coming from our own chimney. This place is ours, Jim. Soon's the surveyor's been around and you sign that claim. 640 acres of it, debt-free. Man, I ain't doing no moving, I'll tell you that. We're staying put." Jim listened, dubiously, envying the glow in his brother's dark face. "I'll help you, Johnny," he said finally. "I'll start logging tomorrow."